I first heard the essay phrase in a fluorescent-lit conference room 2 years after I'd graduated. You don't hear much about the overlooked voices who taught us the true meaning of empathy. The facilitator intoned, and the words rolled out so familiarly, they almost felt comforting. Then she attributed the line, as articulated by one of our own applicants, Miss Nadine Essam, in her 2018 college application essay. Though we didn't offer her a spot at the time, her insights have proven invaluable to our diversity training. A ripple of polite applause spread through the audience of HR managers and C-suite executives. I sat at a table near the back, heart pounding, notebook unopened before me. It was the first official gathering of the Crosspoint Innovations Inclusive Leadership Summit, and the keynote speaker was quoting my misspelled, grammar-slipped undergraduate essay, verbatim. Exactly the words I'd labored over in my cramped college dorm room, the same sentences I'd thought lost in the applicant pile. Yet here they were, repurposed as a cornerstone of corporate culture training. I pressed my palms together under the table and exhaled slowly. My shot at Crosspoint had evaporated the day I submitted that essay back in 2017. Numbers too low, extracurriculars too meager, but the lines I'd crafted stayed behind, like ghostly footprints in their system. I couldn't help but feel vindicated, amused, and more than a little indignant. 2 days earlier, the conference organizer, a recruiter named Elena Morales, had emailed me. "We noticed you're in the area," she'd written, "and thought you might be interested in attending our Inclusive Leadership Summit. I see you applied to Crosspoint in 2017. Your essay topic on the quiet courage of those we overlook aligns with our mission. We'd be honored if you'd join us as our guest." I stared at the message, mind racing. Was it a subtle apology, a recruitment ploy, or just a generic invite that happened to reference my essay? Can you believe this? I'd asked my best friend, Marcus, over coffee. They not only rejected me, but now they want me to come absorb the same words that cost me a seat at their table. He laughed and shook his head. "It's savage and brilliant. Go. See how they spin it for themselves." So I booked the ticket. Now seated amid strangers in the grand ballroom, I listened as the facilitator, the impeccably tailored Miss Park, wrapped up my passage. She closed her eyes, breathing in as though savoring every syllable. Nadine wrote, and I quote, "True inclusion demands more than a checkbox. It requires us to listen to the stories nobody asked for, to see the humanity in those voices we've silenced." A flicker of applause. Let this be our guiding principle. My fingertips tingled. The essay had been raw, full of personal anecdotes. How I tutored an immigrant student whose accent was mocked. How I watched a janitor's daughter struggle to speak up in class until I invited her to co-lead a project. That story, once buried in administrative oblivion, was now broadcast to Fortune 500 decision-makers. A woman at the next table leaned over. "Amazing, isn't it? That's one of the best applicant essays we've ever seen." I swallowed. "By Nadine Essam," I said gently. She whirled. "You? You're Nadine?" I nodded. "I guess you recognized the writer." She smiled, paling. "Your name was on the slide. You were the quote at the top." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry they treated you that way. But it's incredible that your words are shaping their policies now." I managed a thin smile and turned my attention back to the stage. The next presentation was on leveraging unconscious bias training to drive innovation. As slide after slide scrolled by, graphs on retention rates, testimonials from senior management, I felt a nagging question form. Was the summit truly about change, or more about corporate self-congratulation? Later, at a breakout session on elevating marginalized voices, I found an empty seat beside a middle-aged man in a navy blazer. He tapped his smartphone. "You're Nadine Essam, aren't you?" he asked, voice genial. "I read your essay years ago. Brilliant." I hesitated. "You read it?" He laughed. In retrospect, we always regretted it. He looked sheepish. "I'm actually one of the people who pushed back. You lacked the GPA benchmarks." My pulse jumped. "You voted against me?" He winced. "Yes. I'm so sorry. At the time, we were under pressure to meet quotas for STEM majors. Yours was humanities. I let the sting wash over me. And now you quote me in your diversity training." He sighed. "Yes. We realized that homogenizing for metrics cost us authentic perspectives. Your essay helped us wake up." I studied his face, honest regret in creased lines. What kind of change have you made? He dove into a litany of new initiatives. We rewrote hiring rubrics to de-emphasize GPAs, created portfolio reviews for non-traditional talent, funded podcast series on employee narratives. He rattled off acronyms and pilots, clearly proud. Your essay was catalyst. We called it the ISM effect. I blinked. The what? He smiled wryly. A bit cheesy, but it stuck. I processed the irony. They'd ignored me as an applicant, but built a movement on my words. I wanted to feel triumphant, but instead I felt tangled between validation and the knowledge I'd spent years working twice as hard to prove myself outside their system. That evening, I joined a small networking dinner for keynote speakers and VIP attendees. The table glowed under hanging lanterns, set with artisanal bread and microgreens. Miss Park sat to my right. Across sat Elena, the recruiter who invited me. Both greeted me effusively. Elena cleared her throat. Nadine, would you consider sharing your story tomorrow at our closing panel? We'd love to hear your journey from applicant to influencer of our curriculum. I searched their faces. You want me to speak? Miss Park nodded. Yes. You deserve credit. I took a breath. All right, I'll do it. Inside, I felt a flicker of excitement, a chance to take back ownership. I spent the drive back to my hotel rehearsing how I'd open with that rejection letter, pivot to the moment I learned they'd quoted my essay, and then land on how I built my own career, one that never needed their validation. I'd weave in fresh examples: the community mural I spearheaded in my hometown, the small nonprofit I launched for first-generation applicants, and the workshops I'd lead on authentic storytelling. I imagined delivering an electric, candid talk, leaving them buzzing. My pulse raced. At dawn, I awoke to ocean mist, drifting down the eucalyptus-lined boulevard outside my window. I brewed coffee and reviewed my notes. Chapter 1, my 2017 rejection and heartbreak. Chapter 2, the email. Chapter 3, the SM effect. Chapter 4, moving forward. My cursor blinked on the laptop. I typed a rough opening. 2 years ago, I sat in my dorm room, trembling as I pressed submit on my college application, pouring every ounce of myself into an essay about the stories nobody asked for. I never imagined that, today, those same words would be recited by corporate trainers to Fortune 500 executives. I paused, smiling. The narrative arc was elegant, but I couldn't stop there. I needed a hook, a story twist that would captivate them. So I added, but here's the thing. I wrote that essay after watching my mother's employer dismiss her for missing work to care for my sick sister. My essay wasn't academic, it was visceral. And if I'd been admitted then, perhaps my path would have been different. Yet, standing here now, I realized that rejection was my greatest gift. I felt a jolt. Reframing rejection as a catalyst for my own agency, that was powerful. The panel began with a round of morning coffee. I sat center stage alongside 2 SVP-level guests, all facing a semicircle of attendees. The moderator nodded to me. Nadine SM, your essay inspired much of this conference. Tell us how you feel about that legacy. I inhaled deeply, heart hammering but voice steady. Thank you, I began. It's surreal to be here. 2 years ago, I wrote an essay demanding that organizations listen to overlooked voices. I was a nervous 18-year-old who thought that if I could just articulate my story, I'd be heard. I wasn't. Yet here we are quoting every word, except me. A ripple of laughter. I let it settle. My essay was born from personal pain. My mother, a single parent, lost her hours and her benefits because she chose family over an inflexible schedule. I wrote about that because no one else would listen. When Crosspoint rejected me, I felt invisible. But when I learned my words were quoted in diversity training, I realized they listened, just not when I needed them. Miss Park nodded, eyes bright. I turned back to the audience. If we want true inclusion, we have to move beyond lip service. Quoting my words today without my consent, or a change in policy, would be hollow. So let's go further. I challenge every leader in this room to adopt these 5 commitments. I held up my index finger. 1. Embed story sharing circles in hiring, so applicants speak directly, not just in essays. 2. Require a blind essay review panel, removing all names and alma maters. 3. Allocate 10% of budgets to community-led projects. 4. Link executive bonuses to inclusion metrics tied to real employee feedback. 5. Create an annual open forum outside HR channels where any person can propose policy changes to the board. I watched my words sink in. The C-suite faces sharpened, some nodding, others audibly scribbling. The proposals cut deeper than any diversity training ever had. I leaned forward. If we truly value these voices, we must share power with them. Not just quote their stories, but build systems that elevate them. My palms tingled. The moderator leaned in. Powerful. Nadine, how do you see leaders sustaining these commitments? I outlined a roadmap: quarterly open town halls, peer mentoring networks, transparent reporting dashboards, rotating board seats for non-executive employees. Each proposal was practical, drawn from my nonprofit work. By the end, the panel erupted in applause, longer and more genuine than any polite clapping I'd heard thus far. Later, as attendees swarmed to shake my hand, thank me, and request follow-up meetings, I felt a vindication that no single admission letter had ever conferred. My voice, once ignored, now resonated across corporate halls. That afternoon, I stood at the hotel's ocean-facing terrace, breathing in sea air, phone in hand. A message from my college admissions counselor popped up. Congratulations, CrossPoint's board has approved new holistic review policies, effective next cycle. Your essay led to this change. I stared at the text, vision blurring. Their words finally matched my own. To listen, to see, to share power. I typed a reply, thank you. Then I set the phone down, letting the salt breeze carry away the last traces of old rejection. As the sun dipped toward the Pacific horizon, I knew my story was no longer confined to that 500-word essay. It lived in boardroom agendas, policy manuals, and the hearts of every leader who dared to question their own practices. And as I closed my eyes, the distant surf whispering beyond the glass, I realized that having one's words ignored can sometimes be the greatest invitation to ensure they're never ignored again. Part 2 begins when those policies take root, when CrossPoint's new admissions framework opens doors for others, and when I return to campus to mentor the next generation of storytellers, making sure their voices too are heard, not just quoted. When I stepped off the stage, the applause still ringing in my ears, I felt a strange mix of elation and calm resolve. The room emptied a bit, leaving clusters of executives leaning in with questions, not just about my essay, but about how to sustain the commitments I'd laid out. I moved through the current of people, handshakes, business cards, invitations to coffee, and realized my role had changed. I was no longer just an invited guest. I was a catalyst, an author turned advocate, whose story was reshaping real policies. 1. From summit to strategy session, the morning after the closing panel, I walked into CrossPoint's headquarters for a private strategy meeting with Elena Morales, the recruiter who'd first emailed me. We sat in a glass-walled conference room, overlooking downtown's glass and steel spires. On the table sat a clean pad marked SM Effect Action Plan. Elena began, Nadine, thank you for your opening remarks. We've never seen such engagement at an offsite. Board members are already asking HR to implement your 5 commitments. I sipped water and leaned forward. These commitments only work if they're woven into the fabric of your systems. Let's talk next steps. The whiteboard filled quickly. Blind review pilot, HR to strip identifying info from 100 fall 2021 applications. Names, addresses, alma maters, leaving only essays and project portfolios for an interdisciplinary panel. Story circles, monthly moderated sessions where hires at all levels share lived experiences in a safe space. Supervisors must attend at least 2 per quarter. Board fellowship, 2 rotating community fellows from entry-level positions to attend board meetings quarterly with speaking rights on inclusion topics. Transparency dashboard, a public-facing inclusion metrics page on the company site, tracking promotion rates, retention by demographic, and story circle feedback scores. Executive incentives, bonuses for senior leaders tied 20% to inclusion metrics, 10% to community fellow proposals implemented. By lunchtime, we had a comprehensive rollout plan, budgets, and timelines. HR asked me to co-lead the pilot committee. I agreed. My phone buzzed with LinkedIn messages from colleagues intrigued by the SM effect. I smiled. My essay had been quoted, but now my actions would speak, and I would ensure my words sparked real change. 2. The blind review debut. That fall, I logged into CrossPoint's applicant portal, not as a rejected candidate, but as an invited reviewer. In a small, windowless room, I sat alongside 3 engineers, 2 marketing managers, and 1 R&D scientist. On the screen, 5 applicant files lay open, each anonymized. I read the first essay, a moving account of a first-generation student building a community garden in her hometown. Next were her project records, a video demo of a sustainable irrigation prototype. I scored with the same rubric as everyone else, attributing technical merit and storytelling equally. An hour later, I saw the final rankings. These 5 would receive interviews regardless of test scores. After the session, the lead HR manager approached. Nadine, your scores skewed significantly, higher than GPA-based reviewers. The panel was divided on one candidate who had a 3.0 GPA, but an astonishing community impact project. I nodded. That's exactly why we need this. Without prioritizing diverse strengths, we miss talent. She smiled. We're integrating your feedback into the next batch of 200 applications. Walking back through the lobby, I felt the same rush as when I first clicked submit on my college essay. But now it was about 10 people's futures, not just mine. I realized this blind review pilot was more than policy. It was personal redemption, a chance to open doors for voices like mine, and many more. 3. Mentoring the next generation inspired by my role at Crosspoint. I reached out to my alma mater's admissions office. I'd been invited back to campus as a speaker. This time I approached them with a formal proposal, a storytelling mentorship, where upper-year students coach applicants on articulating lived experiences in essays. The Dean of Admissions, Dr. Ibrahim, met me in his paneled office. I laid out a scheme: senior mentors matched with first-gen and underrepresented applicants, guided workshops on narrative structure, and feedback circles open to parents and guardians. We agreed on a pilot of 50 mentees. Over the next spring, I recruited a dozen student mentors, some from student government, some from the Creative Writing Club. We held weekly sessions in the library's glass gallery, each mentee sharing draft essays, sometimes trembling at the vulnerability of it all. I watched nervous applicants blossom, a veteran finding the words to describe service, a single mom detailing her struggles, balancing work and studies, an art major explaining how skateboarding taught her resilience. By the end of the semester, 40 out of 50 mentees submitted completed, polished essays. The admission office reported a 20% increase in offers extended to first-gen students who participated. I attended the send-off ceremony, proud as a parent. When one of my former mentees, Jasmine, accepted her letter, she grabbed my hand. "You believed my story mattered," she whispered. "I'll carry that forward." In that moment, I understood the true ripple of a single essay. It not only shaped corporate training, but ignited a chain of mentorship that would resonate for years in both corporate and academic spheres. 4. Confronting the past. One afternoon, I received a LinkedIn message from Henry Caldwell, the very admissions committee member who'd voted against me. His note was brief. "Nadine, thank you for your work at Crosspoint and campus initiatives. I regret my past decisions. Would you consider meeting to share wisdom on inclusion practices?" I stared at the message, caught between wariness and curiosity. Finally, I replied, "Happy to discuss ways to improve admissions and corporate programs. Coffee next week?" We met at a quiet cafe just off the financial district. He arrived early, looking older, grayer at the temples, a touch more lined around the eyes. He scanned the room until he saw me and stood. We shook hands, the first time really seeing each other outside committee corridors and conference auditoriums. Over lattes, he apologized for dismissing my essay. "We were under pressure for statistics," he said, voice earnest. "I see now those numbers come at a cost, stories left unheard. Your work helped me confront that." I nodded. "Thank you for acknowledging it. Change is hard when we cling to metrics, but listening can save us from blind spots." He scribbled notes. "Your story circles concept on-site at Crosspoint is brilliant. Would it translate to an admissions context?" I outlined how to adapt monthly story circles for admissions, panels including alumni and faculty listening to recorded applicant stories, caring not just about grades but about journeys. He listened, asked detailed questions. Before leaving, he said quietly, "I hope more voices like yours shape policies. I'll support this initiative at my institution." We parted with a handshake that felt like a truce, but also like a seed planted together. We'd write a new chapter in admissions history. 5. The first-year test. The first full cycle of blind reviews, story circles, and community fellows concluded with tangible data. Crosspoint's HR report arrived in my inbox. Anonymous essay pilot, 38% increase in female STEM hires. Board fellow proposals, 2 volunteer-led sustainability projects funded. Inclusion dashboard, 95% employee awareness of story circles, 87% satisfaction with diversity metrics transparency. Across campus, the admissions office reported 12% rise in first-gen matriculants, up from 4% the previous year, attributing much of it to the mentorship program. I sat in my home office at dusk, the reports spread out before me. My mother called from her kitchen back in Detroit, I saw your name in the alumni newsletter. They quoted you again, this time in the annual report. I laughed, her pride echoing in my ear. I never thought I'd outgrow that essay, I said, but it's only where my story started. 6. A new legacy. The next offsite, I was invited back to the Inclusive Leadership Summit, not as a guest but as a keynote speaker. The same conference room filled, this time with standing ovations before I spoke. I opened with a fresh anecdote. The day I led our pilot blind review, a young engineer wrote in tears that she never thought her project work would outshine her transcript. I launched into lessons learned, weaving in student mentor success stories and Caldwell's admissions partnership. But I didn't end there. I closed with a vision. Imagine companies and universities not just quoting essays they once ignored, but structurally embedding every story into decision-making, from boardrooms to classrooms. That is how empathy becomes action. The audience rose in a roar. I realized I had turned a moment of rejection into a lifelong mission, one that spanned sectors and generations. 7. Full circle in spring back at campus the following spring. I walked through the columned archway during yield weekend, watching families with prospective students. At the admissions tent, I spotted Dr. Ibrahim greeting applicants. He waved me over. Behind him, banners read, "Welcome to your story." I greeted anxious teens, clutching portfolios. Together, we navigated story circles and blind review workshops set up under oak trees. A teenage girl with a bright grin said, "I love how you show our stories matter." I knelt at her level. "Your story is the compass for our decisions. Keep telling it." Later, in my car, I reflected on the journey, that cramped dorm room, the 2017 rejection, the quoted essay at a corporate summit, the partnerships formed, the policies changed, the countless stories elevated. I understood then my words had found new homes in boardrooms, admissions offices, and open heart sessions. And each time I spoke, mentored, or advocated, I honored not just Nadine the applicant, but Nadine the storyteller, a person whose narrative could no longer be ignored. As twilight settled over the campus quad, lanterns glowing along pathways, I parked by the admissions office and stepped out. The breeze carried laughter and promise. I lifted my chin and walked in, greeted by faces bright with possibility. Together, we were writing the next chapter of inclusion, one story, one policy, one life at a time.